I don't know if you could figure this out, but I am not a woman. I am a guy. And whenever we are looking at female ancestors in this series, I wanted to bring in a feminine voice. So last week, talking about vulnerable populations, I brought in my friend Jennifer Palmer, who works with Napa County and all things homelessness, and she did an amazing job just giving us a clue about that vulnerable population and how to think about it and all that. And today, I bring you another friend of mine who I met, now I know, 15 years ago, we think. And she happens to be the DA of Napa County. So please welcome Allison Haley. Ooh, we're almost out of battery, so send somebody up in case we need that. I'm glad you're here.
Hi.
All right.
Good morning.
So, we figured out kind of when we met. You moved here in 2005, and I thought that I met you when I sat on the Domestic Violence Task Force. And I remember that kind of because I remember giving a presentation about gender stuff and church and theological interpretation and how a lot of churches are not supportive of women in domestic violence. They tell them to go back to their abusive husbands for theological and biblical interpretation issues. And I was talking about that, and I thought I did a great job in that presentation, but it was not memorable for you. So so apparently we're going to trade your mics here. So we'll go with what you think. So help us get to know Allison Haley a bit. And part of my reason for bringing you in today is obviously you're at the top of the food chain in terms of the courts here in Napa County, kind of, and law enforcement. And so I think you have resonance with Deborah, who also was at the top and can speak to us about some of those things, which we'll get to. And I thought it would be helpful just to hear from your perspective here now. So first of all, where did you start your life, and tell us a little about that.
I was born in Los Angeles and raised in Orange County. I'm the third of three girls, and I was raised by a mom and dad. My dad, who has since passed away, was an addict. And I don't know how many of you have loved or lived with an addict, but there was a lot of there was drinking, and if he wasn't drinking, he was taking pills, or if he wasn't taking pills, he was smoking, or he was an addict. He had that addict personality and loved me as much as he was able to. But I think those other substances always kind of came first. My mom, a woman of extraordinary faith and prays for me every day, also battled a tremendous number of mental illnesses, right? Crippling anxiety, some agoraphobia later, where she was unable to leave the house and so forth. So when you are a child raised in that kind of environment, you learn how to lie very easily about dad's not in rehab, he's on a business trip, mom can't leave the house because she has the flu, not that she is paralyzed on the couch. Later in my adolescence, my father was arrested and eventually convicted of embezzlement. He was sent to prison in my late adolescence and was released after I had started college. Because it's embezzlement, the government has this thing called asset forfeiture. And asset forfeiture means that from the moment of his arrest, the house was taken, the cars were taken, the bank accounts were frozen, and my mom and I were left literally overnight homeless, driving her 1983 Corolla around, and everything else was frozen, and we had no ability to access any of that. So we were homeless, my mom and I, while he was incarcerated, and so it was a pretty traumatic, messy childhood.
Yeah, and I've talked at different times with the congregation about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. And there's a scale of those, and the more that you have, the more challenging things become in terms of a mass group. And so I'm hearing a daughter of an addict, person struggling with addiction, mother struggling with some mental illness issues. I'm hearing parent incarcerated, loved one incarcerated, and I'm hearing homelessness Those are 4 of the ACEs. And you spoke a little bit about it, learning behaviors to kind of cover things, but how else did it shape your eyes or shape you?
So as common with a lot of children with traumatic childhoods, I became not a problem, right? I got straight A's. I never drank. I never went out late. I never wanted to be an additional stress on top of what was already going on at home. That led, however, to really my own struggle, crippling at times with anxiety and eating disorders. I feel like if I don't do well in this interview today, I feel like I can't eat lunch. Like that's my punishment somehow for not doing well in my own estimation. So I've struggled with that over the years. I was sexually abused by a sister's boyfriend. He used to hold me down and kiss me. That was the extent of it, but still very traumatic when you're 7 and he weighed 300 pounds. And as an adult, I don't like being hugged. Like I don't like being up against people that way. So those experiences as a child certainly carry over. I'm 46 years old today, and I still think about, well, how did I do today as to whether or not I'm allowed to eat dinner. So those kinds of things still carry on. I think I'm much healthier than I was maybe even 20 years ago, but it's still there. It affects how I parent, affects our marriage, absolutely.
Yeah. And your daughter Fiona is 7 years old.
Yes.
Does that mess with you at all? Do you think much about that correlation in your life and hers?
Yes, in one generation, right? I am the child of a California prison inmate, and my daughter is the daughter of the first district attorney. It's very different. It makes me anxious, of course, everything does, but it makes me anxious that and I remember talking to my husband. So my husband was raised in a very Caucasian middle class sort of normal way. And I said to him, I said, she's not going to have any character. Like, we have all this stuff, and we live in the Napa Valley, and I have a job, and there's not cops at our door, at least, for bad reasons. And she's not going to have any character because I felt like the only thing that made me deeply moral was having gone through these experiences. And my husband was like, you don't have to have gone through, like, we can still raise this good person. You don't have to have gone through that. But it certainly affects the way that I parent. I know that Mark will get upset, well, she didn't eat 9 fruits and vegetables today. And I'm like, Mark, the cops didn't evict us. We're fine. Like, she had a fine day. So it very much is different in terms of how we parent and so forth. Yeah.
That's helpful. We also sit on cohort 1 of the First 5 network, along with 15 of our favorite friends. And we had to introduce ourselves in this process and give a little bit of a bio. We had like 3 or 5 minutes to do it. And I remember talking about how I don't, in the clinical sense, I don't have any adverse childhood experiences. Doesn't mean I didn't skin my knee or fall off my bike or anything. I mean, these clinical type levels of things, it was 0. And I remember getting written feedback from some just saying like, I don't know if I know anybody that was a 0. And you're right, Allison, we're all very boring people.
Yes.
That's what it does. Case in
Plaintiff's
point.
Exhibit A. No.
Right. And tell us a little about your husband, Mark.
My husband, Mark. So we've been married 17 years. He's the best person I've ever known. I recommend that if you're looking to marry someone, marry the best person you've ever known. He was my high school boyfriend's friend, but we waited the requisite bro code. He hates when I tell that story. We didn't date for years and years until after high school. But we don't have a lot in common. We would never have found each other online. We don't like the same things. We don't do the same things. We don't read the same books. It's worked out beautifully, and we have the same values. He's this very deeply moral person, and it seems to have worked.
Yeah. I just love your response. I think I probably asked you that because I ask people personal questions all the time. I can get away with it as a pastor. They don't think I'm too creepy. And your response, every time I heard you talk about your husband, it was, I married the best person I could find, or the best person I've ever known, which I think is just so cool. So that's awesome. Okay, so backing up a little bit, where'd you go to college?
I went to Biola, the Bible Institute of Los Angeles. I'm very good at Trivial Pursuit in the Bible category.
Yeah, very good. So you actually knew who Ehud was, perhaps?
No, I still don't.
Oh, okay. Fair enough, fair enough. And I know you mentioned you were raised in the faith a little bit, so how did that factor into your earlier childhood? And Biola is a Christian college, I assume, yeah?
My middle sister had actually attended Biola before, and interestingly, they had a scholarship for kids whose parents were in prison, which I took advantage of. I didn't, it's not that I didn't fit in there well, but there was no one like me, right? I knew very early on that I wanted to go to law school. I knew very early on that I wanted to practice criminal law. And that is a very unique kind of person, a very unique interest level, right? To be someone who, at that time, liked true crime before it became the cool thing to like. So I didn't fit in real well there. My father was released from prison while I was in college, and like I told you, I was the kid who never became a problem. I didn't feel like after college I could leave them yet. He had been released, and my mom and he were living in a by-the-week motel in Anaheim, I believe, at that time. So I stayed and I ended up doing a master's degree at Cal State Long Beach in statistics while I made sure that they were okay. Once they got settled down is when I felt free enough to go to law school, what I had always wanted to do, and I went to law school here at UC Davis.
Very good. What was the genesis of you wanting to go into law?
So I have a few answers to this question. The first one is Silence of the Lambs, the movie, was my Star Wars. I loved it. It was pivotal, really. That's kind of my funny answer. My real answer is because of my dad's experience, I became incredibly interested in the effect of incarceration on American families. I became incredibly interested in issues regarding criminal justice and overarching issues of redemption and second chances and sort of what that meant. So my interest was both, yes, that kind of culture in the early 90s, getting very interested in that, always believing and thinking and feeling like true stories are crazier than anything that you could make up. That has been my experience now working in the industry for over 2 decades now. And then those overarching issues of what justice is and what redemption means, so forth, it really triggered my interest to go into criminal law.
All right. And walk us through your trajectory up to this point. You've been in Napa for 15 years. What did you start doing, and how long have you been the DA?
So I came to Napa in 2005. Before that, I was a federal prosecutor. I worked in Los Angeles. My specialties have always been in homicide and in child molest. So when I started at the DA's office, I started with kind of your baby cases to make sure that I wasn't a screw-up, right? So I started in juvenile, and I did some misdemeanors, but ended up doing my first murder within the first 5 years of being at the Napa County DA's office. In 2013, I was the first woman promoted into a chief deputy spot. That's a management position. It's third in line at the district attorney's office. The DA's office has it's the largest law firm in Napa County. It has just under 80 employees total. So I was third in line at that time. My predecessor, Gary Lieberstein, had retired. And I was appointed by the Board of Supervisors in the very end of 2016, and ran unopposed in 2018 as the first woman elected district attorney in Napa County.
Which I think is pretty cool. Yeah, right on. That's a big deal. That's a very big deal. So I'm not sure if you are aware of this, but apparently there are more men than women in the legal profession. Is that true?
That is true.
Okay. How is that? Tell us about some of the challenges that's made for you. I know some of the things that you may share, but what are the differences between a man and a woman going into this profession? What kind of obstacles they may or may not face, how they're treated, et cetera, et cetera?
So when I was Gary Lieberstein's chief, if you're the DA at any given time, someone is furious at you, right? Someone's angry at you, you charge their child with a crime, or you didn't file a case, whatever it is. and they will send you hate mail, right? You'll get either a literal letter in the mail or an email, or they'll scream at you at Browns Valley Market. And when I was Gary's chief, I would go through these for responses, and I would read them, and it would say, "Dear Gary," and then it would go over all the terrible things he had done, right, in their eyes. So now that I'm the district attorney, I get those, but what's interesting about my hate mail is that it'll say, "Dear Allison, here's all the things that you did that I disagree with, and I'm mad at you, and you're fat and ugly." Like, there's always somehow a little dig about how I'm probably not a very good wife or mother, and I'm ugly, and I'm fat. It always devolves into that. And I never saw that. I never saw someone tell Gary that he's an ugly man and was too skinny or too, like, it never got there.
Yeah. So
that has been an experience. I think that being a woman in leadership, I think that we have, as a society, have an idea about what a leader is like, and that leader is aggressive and domineering and charismatic and a big personality, and they are a leader. And I am none of those things. I am an introvert, actually. It's just that the work became more important than my desire for privacy or my fear of being judged. And I think a lot of women find ourselves in leadership positions in that way. My leadership is not domineering and aggressive. It has a different feel to it. And I think at some point I had to embrace that I'm a different kind of leader than, not that there's anything wrong with a dominant, domineering, that kind of traditional or stereotypical leader, but there is a place at the table for women with that different style of leadership to have a voice in the conversation.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I'm wondering how you balance on that razor's edge of being true to who you are, what you need to say, and feeling confident in that, knowing that it's almost always a no-win thing, I imagine. I remember, regardless of your politics, when Hillary Clinton was running for president, she couldn't win. I mean, if she said one thing too soft, then she was a pushover. If she said it too hard, then she was, too aggressive, and it was like almost impossible for her to ever get it right, let alone the jokes on her appearance and pantsuits and whatnot. That was never sent the other way. So how do you stay true north? Is there a way that you've learned to kind of filter out, to noise cancel all the noise of culture?
Humor. I think women are very good at using humor to counterbalance that. And let me give you an example. I run our office's Facebook page, the Napa County District Attorney's office page. And just last week, I posted an article about women in prosecutors' offices and sort of the new tide of new female prosecutors. And some guy left a comment that has a lot of expletives that I will not repeat here about tell me, where do women get their jurisdiction from? #go make me a sandwich. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm reading this to my husband, and I'm just indignant by how dare he, blah, 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 blah. And my husband barely looks up from what he's reading, and he says, he's never had your sandwiches then. And he was done. And he went back to what he was doing. And he's right. That is as much attention as a comment like that deserves. The end. I mean, I had already written up this diatribe and what I was going to say and how I was going to, and it just went away. And constantly being reminded that it's not, if I was going to worry about every one of those, I'd never get the work done. And the work as a district attorney is to treat people with compassion and dignity and kindness. Ultimately, all members, including defendants in the criminal justice system. If I got worked up about whether or not someone thought I was fat or whether I should be off making sandwiches, I'd never get the important work done. So constantly reminding myself, it's about the work, enables me to get the work done.
Yeah, and that's been a refining process your whole life, I imagine.
Oh, the first few times that I open Facebook and here's a bunch of strangers talking about me. It was devastating. It's devastating. It's like you become a boss and people forget that you still have feelings or that I still read those comments. It was devastating until you just keep working, keep doing the work, and it really fades from the conversation.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So when we think about the story of Deborah, and she, like you, was at the top of the legal system, so to speak, and woman in charge, and then of course we have Jael in there also. What sticks with you in the story? What resonates with you about the story, if anything?
Well, that murder is a very personal murder, right? That is not a stranger murder. I've been to a lot of different murder scenes. I think what really sticks out to me in the story of Deborah was Barak, who wanted her to come with him. There is something different about women being in leadership. I'm interpreting that from him, as he wanted that comfort to go with him. And I think that when women are in positions of leadership, we allow that to happen. I have been asked by colleagues, now my staff, right? They come and they tell me their personal stories. They talk to me about raising kids and having a family, or raising a kids and having this kind of very demanding profession. I think being a woman in leadership allows that kind of vulnerability that I never saw when I had male-run offices. So I think there's something to the idea that I lead with, and this is rich coming from me because I don't have a particularly high emotional IQ, but there is something profoundly different about women being in leadership. And I'll give you an example. So I was in the office when the Yountville massacre occurred here in Yountville, where we had Albert Wong shoot and kill 3 clinicians and then take his own life in a mass murder here in Napa County. And I attended the autopsies. I was told by the head of our coroner department, "Oh, you don't want to see this." And I said, "I'm the district attorney." I'm like, "Yeah, I need to." No, one of our women was pregnant, and he meant it in this very solicitous, generous. He didn't want me to have to see it because I was a mom. Right, and it was so rooted in good intentions, and I don't want to be misheard that way. It was absolutely motivated out of kindness, but to me, I wanted there to be a woman in that room when those women were being autopsied, when that baby was delivered. It was very important to me that she wasn't alone. I wouldn't want to be alone, or I wouldn't want my daughter to be alone that same way. And when you have women in leadership, sometimes we, especially in work that I do where we see these kinds of cases, thankfully not often in Napa County, but it matters. Those little things matter in terms of really treating people with the compassion and the dignity that they deserve.
Yeah. Wow. I'm just thinking back, taking in what you're saying here, and hadn't really thought about this because I'm a guy, but I really do. I think you're right. I think there is you say you're not maybe high on the emotional IQ side, but I think you're hardwired for it better than a lot of men, just genetically. And so you carry with you empathy, perhaps, more than it would be assumed of men. And I know statistically, I'm not being, that could come off all wrong. But I know statistically, women have a much stronger vocabulary period than men, and have a much stronger emotional vocabulary than men. So there really is, some science stuff going on that suggests, women are just going to be better at it because you're hardwired for it. And that what what an interesting gift to give that office, because I don't know that we generally think of the DA's office as this warm, fuzzy place. Not that that's what you're saying, but I think a lot of people might have a very stark kind of impression of that space.
I think the current conversation about criminal justice reform or progressive prosecutors really brings into play those issues of redemption and that kind of duality that you're speaking of. I did child molest cases and homicide cases. I will never apologize for putting the man who impregnated his own daughter at the age of 11 away for 800 years. I will never apologize for it. There are things that you can do where you have forfeit the right to live with the rest of us. However, my clients, the people of the state of California, have told me by the legislation that they passed and so forth that they want things like addiction to be dealt with not as a criminal justice problem, but more as a public health problem. It's clear to me that we want homelessness not to be criminalized, but dealt with as a human problem, right? As a public health concern, as those kinds of things. So there is absolutely a place at the table at district attorney's offices to come down like a house of bricks on the people who destroy other people or attempt to destroy other people for their own selfish reasons. But there's a place at the table for redemption, right? There's a place at the table for conversations about how communities can interact and how we can provide rehabilitative services and we can be healthier as a community. But those two pieces of it, I think that DAs have done a really good job on the first part. Look how hard we are on crime and we're gonna put these people away. And I think we've lost sight of all of the other kinds of things that a district attorney's office does. That to me is probably more important than the first one. Does that make sense? Yeah.
That's good.
You're so far away, I can't get any read. I don't have my glasses
Yeah,
on.
I'm used to that. Yeah. Just two more questions. The first is, I know that you had a faith foundation that you grew up with, thanks to your mom. And just wondering, how does faith inform your life and your work now?
So I got this question earlier this morning, and so I actually looked up the verse, which is in Romans 8:26.
Yep.
Although I don't remember the actual, I should memorize it. The kind of work that I do as the district attorney, fortunately, I don't want you to walk away and think we have a high crime rate. We don't. We have an incredibly low violent crime rate. We have, on average, 2 homicides a year, which is too many, but still extraordinary. However, doing this kind of work, the Yountville massacre, or when we've had child deaths, or we've had massive just waves of terrible child molest and so forth. There have been days, more than one, where I've had to revert to that scripture that talks about how sometimes you don't even have the words to pray anymore, and you rely on the Spirit to do it for you. And I know that there have been several times where I've gone to work and we've had personnel issues and HR issues, and we had this terrible thing that happened in our community, and someone wrote me an email about how fat I was, and all these things are happening, right? And I've had to come back to that foundational scripture to say, God, I don't even have words. Not only are you going to have to protect me and save me and help me be a good mom, now I even need you to pray for me. That kind of intercessory prayer.
Yeah. I think Richard Rohr, or somebody he was quoting, was talking about that exchange as almost a divine therapy, that the Spirit does stuff in us that we can't give words to, and yet it's very powerful. Yeah. We've got a bunch of women here today, and so what would you say to your fellow, well, not your fellow, but your, what would you say to the women who are present here from your experience, words of encouragement or anything?
Well, thank you, because so many of you did the work before, right? That enabled me to take over an office.
Yeah.
But I think as we look to the next generation, or I look to my own daughter, I think it's constant, and especially in a day and age where people feel so free to publicly judge, right?
Yeah.
If I was to open up Facebook right now, there's going to be a thread about something I did or a decision I made on some case, and eventually you will see it that I'm fat and stupid, right? It really is about, is the work that you're doing, is standing up for the ethical response? Is it in raising your family? Is it whatever it is that is your work, not at the DA's office, but wherever? It has to become more important than our fear of being judged. It has to become before our right to privacy or our feelings like, because I know that I would love to not be a public person, but the work becomes more important, right? And I think that constantly reminding ourselves to put those strangers' opinions of ourselves in precisely the small priority that they should have, because it prevents us from being courageous in doing the work. So I think that would be my only advice to whatever kind of work that it is that you do. You will be judged, especially as women doing it. And it can't have as much power as they try to control us with those opinions. Yeah.
Yeah, and hopefully it's going to get better.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So finally, as I did in the early service, going to list some more people here with us today, but how can we pray for you?
I wondered whether I was going to change my answer, but I'm not. And my answer this morning was, I really could use prayer being a better mom. I'm a really good DA, or I think I am, and I find sometimes it's difficult to turn that off and walk through the door and talk about, when I left this morning, Fiona was watching a documentary about giving birth to babies, and my husband's look on his face was, I can't believe you're leaving me. And I'm like, I'm out. See ya. Good luck with that. So when I go home, there's going to be 1,000 questions about breastfeeding and where babies come from, and she's 7, and what that was, what that's like. I want to be fully present and do that as well as the work that I do during the work week. So I could use prayer in that way.
Okay. And I usually pray over guests that we have like this, and I usually do my official prayer pose, which is put my hand on your shoulder. Is that cool? All right, good. Will you pray with us? God, there have been innumerable great women who have charted the course of history in such powerful, positive ways. And we only know the names of a handful. And I'm grateful for Deborah and her legacy, grateful for Jael, and I'm grateful for Allison. And I'm grateful for her life and how she's been shaped and how she's made choices despite some really, truly adverse childhood experiences to choose a path forward that is positive and life-giving for her and for those that she touches. So I thank you for her. I thank you for her life. I thank you that she's in this role in Napa, and I thank you that she is a real deal human being, but is not just a legal robot at the top, but she cares. And she brings wisdom and heart to her work. And that gives me great confidence. And so I thank you so much that that is what has been instilled in her and that she is open to developing. And so I pray that you bless her on that path and continue to give her strength and guidance and more strength and more guidance and courage and noise-canceling ears when there's crap that's said that doesn't need to be said and certainly doesn't need to be heard or owned. So protect her from that. And I pray for her family. And I thank you that she has this beautiful 7-year-old daughter, Fiona, beautiful in every way, from the little I know about her, full of life. And I know that she brings Allison great joy. And I pray that that Allison will be able to be fully in that moment and in that space with Fiona, together with Mark. That as soon as her hand hits the doorknob at home, that she's really home. And she can leave the office at the office because there's something so much more important waiting inside. So give her eyes of grace, give her deep breaths, enrich her relationship, which I'm sure is already good, but enrich her relationship with her daughter even more, that it would just continue to grow and be a thing of beauty and inspiration for them and for any who know them. And I pray for her and Mark that their relationship would continue to grow strong, that they'd continue in this weird partnership, loving each other as the best person they ever knew. And I pray that beautiful things happen in that strong foundation. So just bless her. May your Spirit just touch her and anoint her and add joy and depth to her life. And we'll give you the thanks for what happens. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you for coming today. Let's give one last round of applause to Allison. Well done. Thank you very much. All right. Yep. Thanks again for being here. Have a great week. See you next week.